actually, I think as long as you can craft a structure that is interesting and challenging, I think people are quite fine to do what they're being told to do. The mistake is if you're telling them to do something that feels boring, uninteresting, irrelevant. And so I'm always advocating for just how can you make an interesting and challenging structure for people?
Hey y'all, welcome back to the Takeoff. I am your host, Max Henry, and on today's episode, we have Chris Keighley, who is one of my absolute favorite coaches in the entire sport of parkour. He is from the UK, and I got a chance to chat with him at MoveNYC, and it really sparked a lot of conversation, and I really wanted to get some of that out on the podcast. So if you are unfamiliar with Chris, he does a lot of the ADAPT certification. So he is experienced not only in coaching practitioners, but also in coaching coaches. And I wanted to get into a little bit of the meta of what exactly that means. What are some of the most common flaws or misconceptions that he sees when he is coaching coaches, whether it's in ADAPT or in a situation like MoveNYC or American Rendezvous, and what he thinks parkour is doing really, really well. And he has an amazing perspective. He's somebody that I think manages to blend a lot of the old school discipline and vibes and overall sort of positive flavor of the best of Parkour Generations with a maybe more analytical approach than some of their other coaches. And he has just been in and around the community for such a long time that he's picked up from people like Nico Van Hol and from the Yamakaze and managed to take a lot of different aspects of the community and tie them together into a really beautiful and cohesive coaching framework. So if you're a coach, I think you're going to really get a ton out of this episode. And if you're just looking to learn or experience parkour in a different way, strongly encourage you to keep listening. I'm sorry about the audio quality on this one. Not totally sure what happened there, but for some reason, the internet really did not like Chris's microphone on this day. And for that, I apologize, but blame it on me, not on him, and try not to let that distract you from all the fantastic things he has to share. All right, let's get into it. Chris Keighley,
Cool.
welcome to the Takeoff. It is such a joy to have you on. Thank you so much for coming.
You're very welcome.
You're
Lovely to be on.
making a Thank you. You're making a valiant effort to find time while you are on your current insane adapt coaching tour. And one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on is that we got to hang out at MoveNYC, which was an absolute joy. And to me, you are one of the people, and I think folks who are maybe not coaches in the parkour scene might not know this because there's often an assumption that everybody who coaches, like, that's their passion. Those of us who are in the coaching scene, I think, know that that is often not true. And you're one of the really small handful of people that I look at as being genuinely a master coach. I think the way that you approach it is with the same level of atomic fanaticism that you approach your training, and that's just a rarity. And yeah, I wanted to check in. How's the Adapt tour going? Where have you been? Where are you going? And where are you right now?
So I'm currently in Boston. I'm up here for a combination of doing a level 2 coaching course next week, and American Rendezvous is going to follow on straight off the back of that. So that's where I'm currently in the world, and I'm out on a porch, which is just like a lovely place to do a podcast. Porches are not so much of a thing back home. I flew in from North Carolina, where I was doing a level 1 down in Charlotte, and a few days before that I was doing a level 1 in New York. So it was a slow wind up, had some relaxed time in New York, hanging out with Jesse and Ruby from the Movement Creative, and then it's gone into a bit more of a mad action pace for the back end of the trip.
Yeah, how long have you been? So I see you as the grand poobah of Adapt course delivery. Like what is your actual title? I'm assuming it's not Grand Poobah.
I think
Grand
it should be
Vizier.
Grand Poobah. Well, so it's funny because in your introduction you did use the phrase Master Coach, and I have a horrible feeling somewhere that may technically be a title that I have, but I cannot begin to tell you how much I despise the term Master Coach. Just a real visceral rage towards the term. I think senior coach is fine. Like, I've been doing it a while. I've had the good fortune to travel around a bunch of places and pick up a bunch of knowledge. I think senior covers it. But technically, master might be in there somewhere, but you will never hear me say it.
You can add, yeah, I was like, you can add that, make it masterful coach.
How about high overlord coach?
Pursuit of mastery coach. There we go. High Overlord coach. Well, I am really curious because Adapt, I think, does a great job of drawing a bit more of a diverse crowd. One thing that I've always liked about Parkour Generations' approach to parkour and how PK Gen shares their training is that it's more accessible because often trying hard is framed as the pass fail as opposed to executing a certain movement. There's a lot of, I think, modalities or like styles of parkour where people who come into the gym are like, oh, I couldn't do the Kong or I couldn't do the cork or whatever it is. That's the pass fail. And I think that the way that PK Gen and sort of the older school of parkour practice often set it up is that the pass fail is, did you try as hard as you can? Yes. Okay, great. You passed. You are in the same bucket as everybody else. And if you shirked the effort, you know that and you're in the fail bucket. How do you feel like
The
you've
fail
seen
bucket. What a place to
the
be.
the fail bucket? I've been there. I've been there at the end of some ARDVs in the fail
I, I,
bucket.
I probably had a camp there
It's
at
not the
one point.
worst. There's some lovely people in there. Yeah, there's some lovely people down there. You guys, you can get to hang out. It's kind of like it can be the spot to be. It feels good to be in the success bucket. But I wanted to ask you also, how have you seen the sort of vibe of people who take the Adapt certification course change in the last 10 to 15 years? Because I think our community has changed so much. And I'm curious what you've seen since you get to interact with all these people, like what their expectations are coming in, maybe like what they want out of parkour, just the overall vibe check.
Yeah. It's an interesting question. I think there's some level of like Adapt often gets brought into communities that whether it's directly or have some link with Parkour Generations, or whether it's we've ended up at the same kind of events and kind of met and hung out and vibed through that. So I think there's often some kind of shared values with a lot of the communities that we take Adapt into. And so maybe the profile of the kind of people that come to it hasn't changed so much over the years because there's a small degree of selection there, which is not to say that it's only for people that come from those communities, but just from a logistical perspective, we have strong connections in a lot of those places. I would say that you mentioned that the community is probably diversifying and there's lots of different types of practitioner within the community now. And for sure, we've had people from all kinds of backgrounds and pursuits come to the courses. And so maybe more now you get some of the, let's say, kind of like more hyper skill athlete profile that are also looking to become coaches come along to courses, which I always think makes a more varied environment. The more wide the range of people you have on a course, the more potential learning there is for everyone. So I'm very much not in favour of more homogenous courses, and whether that's age range, making sure we've got a balance of men and women, having people that are mostly focused on, let's say, what a lot of people might think of as old school values versus kind of like hyper performance potential. I think ultimately a good coach should be able to interact and work with all of those people, and so having all of those people on the course just makes a way better experience.
Mm. Yeah,
I
I'm
don't even know
actually
if that
really
answered your
grateful to hear
question.
that. Uh, I think I think you're right that there's a self-selection process, and I think that's true for every certification. Um, just because those are the people who find out about it, that's who gets marketed to, and it's pretty small community, and there is like cross-pollination, but it tends to be at events, not at things people are spending money for. As I think that if somebody is committed enough to spending money on education or continuing education, they're probably like, I'm gonna really go with the one that is gonna satisfy my confirmation bias for my style of training. And maybe it's like the
Yeah,
subconscious interpretation of that. But your point of having like seeing some more like performance oriented athletes who want to be coaching, that makes me happy because I think that there are, like, I look at like Parkour EDU and that framework as being maybe a little bit more in this performance side. But I think that there are so many coaches that in general don't see still the value of certification and maybe don't acknowledge that there's a different skill set between becoming an athlete and training yourself and training somebody else. And to your point of diversification, when you're on a course, that's always been one of my favorite things about getting to coach at events like ARTV or Rendezvous in London, is that when you're working with a group and you have a beginner group and one of those folks is like a 70-year-old woman and one of those is an athletic 18-year-old teen boy who are both getting into parkour for the first time, it takes a different skill set to find how to connect those people and give them like a shared fulfilled experience, versus just like knowing what you like about parkour and then copy pasting that onto whoever is in front of you.
Yeah, which I mean, I suspect we'll get into this in more detail in a bit, but which I think is just fundamentally an error of judgment in what coaching is. Coaching should always draw on your personal experience, and I think the best sessions will have some connection to your practice. But ultimately, the role of the coach is to meet people where they're at and help them grow. So if you've got people in very different places, whether that's parkour experience or life background, your job is to kind of find out where they are and help create the right environment for them to grow in. And the chances are you're going to need to find a way to create multiple environments in one space in order to reach different people.
Yeah. What do you that's a hard task. And I was just at a big S&C conference 2 weekends ago, and it's really fascinating getting to talk to a bunch of coaches in that space because it is so, like, the scope of what they do in a sense is as broad as parkour, but in another sense it's so limited because you can just put everybody in front of a squat rack, and the adaptation is you're just squatting with the bar today, you're squatting with 200 kilos on your back. And that is very simple. Even if you have somebody that has an injury and they need to adapt the movement, you're like, oh, okay, you're gonna reverse lunge or whatever it is. And hearing them talk about how you have to adapt traditional strength and conditioning training, it was eye-opening because I'd always just taken for granted the fact that parkour is like you're completely changing the theme, the movement capacity. For the listener who's wondering what's going on right now, it sounds like you have a Jurassic Park film happening in the background, some
I'm going to
emergency
blame
action going on.
I'm going to blame some World Cup fans causing chaos from the distance. It's probably not that, but the
Okay.
emergency services of Boston are out in force.
Yeah. All of that is, I guess, to say that when you're trying to find that balance, because you're working with coaches and people who are getting into coaching, do you have any guidelines or a framework that you give people to approach that question? So let's say you're working with a beginner class, or as often happens at American events, an intermediate to advanced class where you have several beginners who self-selected a little bit more than they should have, and now all of a sudden you're taking somebody who's at a pretty high level and somebody who or has high athletic potential and somebody who really needs to have the movement broken down for them. What is like the first step that you would recommend to coaches to creating that space?
Um, so I don't know that there's one simple answer to this. I think the key thing is that you need to find some way to build scalability into your environment. So as long as you're not thinking it's like, this is stage 1, this is stage 2, this is stage 3, and I'm just going to walk everyone through these levels regardless of where they're at, then I think you're already on the right path. And I think there's a couple of different kind of scalability elements that can work. So for some people, it might be more about how they're using the physical space. And so you can build a lot of scalability in just by having multiple options baked in through the obstacles that you're using if you're indoors, or just through the path that you're choosing if you're outside. And then the other one is scalability in terms of a movement continuum about, okay, well, some of you are going to do a step vault here, some of you might do a speed step, some of you might do a speed, you can bring in other things. And then ultimately, I think the best is to try and have a combination of the two. So you've got a lot of scalability from the environment that you provide and a lot of scalability through either the techniques or the progressions for those techniques that you're using. And if you can do that, you can have an almost infinite number of options. And then the skill becomes making sure that people are either able to select the right option and progression for them, And if not, can you give them a friendly nudge towards the one that's going to put them in their growth zone?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good example, and I think pointing out the difference between movement scalability and environmental scalability is good, particularly because parkour is so environmental. And so you're talking about if you have somebody doing a step fault and maybe they're not particularly dynamic, but they're learning it on a wooden box, a really appropriate next challenge for them may be to go and do it on a rail, a handrail that's next to the vault box, as opposed to bumping them up to a speed vault. But then you've got somebody who's like a hyper athletic 18 to 20-year-old and they're learning things incredibly quickly. And that is a great space. We're like, okay, you learn the step fault. We're not even going to worry about doing it on the rail. We're going to tap into what you clearly enjoy here, the movement, power, and scalability. And we're going to get you doing speed vault. And then we're going to get you doing it from a bigger gap. And maybe we'll set up like a step up block and you can run and like kind of jump and do like a running speed. And then maybe you add in that environmental scalability to the rail or adding an additional challenge like that. Having the ability to do both on the fly is something that you definitely develop only through failing a lot in my personal experience, looking over at your class and half the class is standing there looking very confused. You're like, oh shoot, I have not done what I was supposed to be doing as a coach.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of practice that goes into kind of fine tuning and knowing which interventions to make and when. But I also think it just comes down to like how you think about these things. And I think I have a slight natural advantage in just that my brain's very mechanical in the way that it thinks about a lot of stuff. So having a continuum of movement of, okay, these are like the 50 different steps that you could do on this pathway. And if your brain already thinks about either the movement or the environment like that, it becomes a little bit easier to then move people into something or help people find something that's appropriate for them, rather than have to consciously think about it during the class of, oh, this isn't working, how can I adapt it for that person? I kind of already have the cheat sheet in the back of my head, and it's very natural to just be, oh, try it like this. Have you considered that?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I also wanted to ask you, so what really got me excited to have this conversation and want to record it is that when we were at MoveNYC, we were talking about just the different ways that coaches approach their delivery and how in parkour there is often this kind of balance between structure and freedom or permissiveness. And I'm curious your take on this. I was actually having a different conversation with a friend at coffee yesterday, and he said that like we were talking about Fig because they had just put out a reel of people bailing and they were kind of like taking the piss out of it, and it was just a very bad look, and they ended up deleting it, which I wish they'd left it up so personally so that people could see how they actually feel about the parkour athletes that they're just cashing in on. Anyway, we were talking about the fundamental spirit of different practices and how sports like parkour or skateboarding, a lot of action sports that are self-deterministic have this kind of anarchistic quality. They're essentially like fundamentally self-guided. Even when you're learning it, it's not like a top-down, it's more of this communal cross-pollination learning experience. God, how many times am I going to say that word today? And then sports like gymnastics or track and field and some martial arts are inherently a bit more authoritarian. And I think a lot of coaches struggle when they're, and I definitely have, trying to find the balance between the top down structure, creating that the enough authoritarian structure that people feel like they know what to do next, but also tapping into the inherent freedom that attracts a lot of people to parkour as opposed to a track and field or a gymnastics. And you were saying that your personal learning preference is a little bit more like you want to have that structure so you can play in the structure and then break it. How do you go about, I guess, do you want to just talk about a little bit about what you think the benefits of structure are versus being too free, and then we can kind of muse on that topic.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so one thing as you were talking that was coming to my mind is that I think a lot of people, it's possible to conflate two different things. So one thing is that parkour, in contrast to athletics and a lot of these other things like weightlifting, is way less linear. So I think you've got like a very linear development and a very non-linear development kind of dichotomy on the one side. And then over here, you've got a very structured or a very free approach, and that's a different dichotomy. But they don't have to match necessarily. You can have quite a structured, non-linear development. And I think in parkour, it's just so common for people to kind of mash the two together. And because this is non-linear, it means I can do anything and you don't get to tell me what to do. And actually, I think as long as you can craft a structure that is interesting and challenging, I think people are quite fine to do what they're being told to do. But the mistake is if you're telling them to do something that feels boring, uninteresting, irrelevant. And so I'm always advocating for just how can you make an interesting and challenging structure for people. And I can't remember if this was when you and I were talking, or if it's a conversation I've had since then. But when we talk about giving people choice in parkour, I think the choice that matters is, having presented your idea to them, would they choose to do it? Not, have you given them the freedom to do whatever they want? And so from a coaching perspective, I'm quite happy being, this is what we're working on today. And I think and hope that it's interesting and challenging enough that people will then choose or consent to do this thing and not just be like, well, you've told me to, so I guess I have to now. Or to have a slightly kind of medium structure of, here are a range of options, and so you have a lot of options from which to choose, but they all focus towards the same thing that we're trying to work on. So it's this kind of like medium level of structure of, how can I help guide your training, especially for people that come to classes for years. I want them to develop over time, and that means you need to have some kind of long-term development plan. You cannot just maximum freedom every week and see what sticks. A, because I don't think that's necessarily the best way for people to learn and progress, and B, because I think coaching has a lot of value, and I think it can have a lot of value for more experienced practitioners as well. And if every time it's just, here's a prompt, go and do whatever you want, at what point are you adding value that they're not going to get from practicing on their own or jamming? And for sure, there's other things in the class, the social element and the cross-pollination that you may not always get at a jam. Sometimes even just like a nice, secure environment if you're going to a gym. But I do think the mistake of turning a coach class into just a slowed down jam isn't where coaching is going to bring the most value to the most people.
That's a great point, and a great, I think a great thing to highlight is that, especially when we start, and I was very guilty of this, which is why I will use we as an inclusive pronoun here. When I started, and many other coaches that I have since observed, you want to replicate your training experience, and often you do that by replicating the environment that you found helpful for learning. And for a lot of the people who survive to become coaches or survive to become effective or more highly skilled parkour athletes, they would have gotten there no matter what. And often we did, because we didn't grow up in a formal training environment. And so when we go to create an environment that we're like, this is going to foster the most joy, the best experience, it's just, all right, today we're going to be doing precisions. I want you to go and find 20 precisions. I'll see you in 45 minutes. And I have definitely been guilty of that. Like, people who took some of my early workshops will probably know that I often would do it as a warm-up, in my defense, to just kind of like let people go and see where their skill level was at. So it was more of like a movement assessment and a warm-up. But I have also seen many classes fall into that pattern where it's like there's rotations of a skill, and it is so broad that it's not a class, it's a jam. And jams are great, but people who sign up to go to a class want to be taught. And I think your point about the fact that like parkour exists in a sort of like quadrant system of linear, non-linear, and structure and versus free is a great point. And we can exist in different environments on different parts of that quadrant. And so a jam is probably going to be non-linear and free, sometimes linear and free. When you go to a jam and you see people just like trying to max out their Kong pre, and somebody's doing a Kong cat, somebody's doing a Kong crane, somebody's doing the Kong pre. Orlando comes and does the double Kong or whatever. Like, that's a pretty linear but free structure. And then on the flip side, I think the best classes have the structured but non-linear approach. And sometimes for beginners, maybe it's structured and linear. I'd never actually thought about putting it on like an XY graph like that, but I do think that's a really, really helpful way to think about it. And also for a coach, if you're trying to make sure that your class is not, or the experience overall is not becoming too authoritarian, even mapping inactivity onto a quadrant system like that, or mapping a week of training could be really helpful. That's for my very mechanical brain.
Yeah. Well, and even just as you say, like over time, you kind of get a sense of, am I spending all my time in this corner of the graph, or actually am I giving a variety of experiences to the students? Because one of the things when you were talking about maybe experienced athletes but who have not got much of a coaching background, going with what was it that like I enjoyed about the practice, and just like the surface level thing is like the freedom. Okay, well that's great. But then I think the second question is, okay, and what did you use that freedom to choose to do? And then select from those kind of things to put into a class setting. Because it wasn't just that you enjoyed having complete freedom, it's that with that freedom, you found some interesting and worthwhile things to do. And it's okay to provide some of those more specific, interesting and worthwhile things to people.
Yeah, absolutely. Who on the, because I think that the sort of delivery, and I'm really curious about, some people might find this maybe overly nerdy, but a recurring theme on this podcast with everybody has been that everybody here wants to deliver their experience of parkour or all of the benefits that they have gotten from training parkour to more people. And a big part of that, I think, is finding the right balance between creating a community and creating a structure that feels progressible for people in a class context. And I'm curious, in your experience, who are some of the, or where are some of the best communities that do the soft skills really well? Because when you walk into a class, how you warm up, how you're greeted, how welcome you feel to talk to the other students, like that is a really fundamental part of the experience, and that really frames how receptive those people are to the level of structure or progression that you're then going to introduce. And I'm curious, because you've gotten to coach so many places, what are some of the communities you think that do that the best, and what are the techniques that you maybe see being used commonly across all those communities?
It's an interesting question. And I think there's both specific and general factors that go. No, so I would argue, actually, I think this is, if I think about what do I do really well as a coach and what do I excel at, I don't think this is where my strengths lie. I'm aware of my role in that environment, and so I put some effort into it, but it's not something that comes particularly naturally to me. And so I have to put a lot more mental process and kind of social capital and energy into trying to do that, versus making sure that everyone's doing something that's like appropriate and challenging. And that comes so naturally to me that I almost don't have to think about it consequentially. But yeah, so there's specific community elements, and then I think also the product of the society that you're in more generally. So I've not gone to regular classes out there, but whenever I'm in Copenhagen, I just think in terms of a welcoming atmosphere to train with a super mixed group of people and everyone being incredibly friendly and kind of socially aware, just the Copenhagen community is like really high up there. I think they do it amazingly.
Yeah.
And I think you can also potentially have ways of doing that gel really well with some people and maybe less so with others. I think it's really interesting when I've been to movement creative classes in New York that they always have a really like social, everyone in a circle, what's something that you'd like to get out of the class today? At the end of the class, what's one thing you got? And I think that's a really nice way to bring people together, and some people really feel engaged and almost like cherished through that kind of thing. So it resonates really strong with a lot of their students. And because of who I am as a person, I'm always there like, I could spend another 2 minutes jumping. Because that's not what I'm going to class for.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely no judgment on them. It's simply what kind of atmosphere do you want to create, and it's going to better align with some students' needs and desires than others.
Yeah, 100%. They're a great example of I was a very hard sell on games because I grew up as an athlete. I was a gymnast as a little kid. I quit gymnastics for a few years. I played baseball from the time that I was like 2 or 3 all the way through the end of high school, and many other traditional sports as well, track, basketball, and yeah, the gamification never felt necessary to me or interesting. And as I went to more events and got to see Street Movement coach in Denmark and got to work with Moving Creative and see how Jesse could capture the attention of so many people, I realized that actually I was arguably in the minority of people who are interested in parkour, that a lot of people who are interested in parkour are drawn to the playful aspect and are maybe less excited about the idea of doing a rail precision 50 times in a row and trying to stick it every time and starting over if they can't than I was, which to me, that was a great training session. Stefan Vigru did a drill like that at London Rendezvous, and I was ecstatic. So this is perfect. But
yeah,
I've realized that, that creating a space that can encompass more of the opportunity for social engagement is really helpful. I've seen the Street Movement guys and Movement Creative both doing very game-based things, and I've tried to find a way to mix that in that feels a lot more authentic to me. I think I've looked less to like contact improv and things, dance and things like that, where I think is where a lot of these games maybe have originated. And for me personally, I'm a little bit more interested in how gameplay is developing in traditional SNC. You see it a lot in like youth sports, a lot of like ball and stick type games, and those are really interesting to me. They gamify it, but it maybe has a little bit more obvious athletic carryover. But I was curious because I fall into the same bucket as you, that the gathering aspect. Just read a phenomenal book. If you've not read it, I actually would really recommend it to you and anybody who's listening. It's called The Art of Gathering, and it is all about how you frame social gatherings, whether that's a party, like a dinner party, an event for United Nations leaders, or something like a class, and the importance of creating those moments of a semi-formal introduction, letting people very clearly know that now is your time to mingle. Here is the structure for how the thing will be run. And then here is the reflection in closing. And I think that, Movement Creative does a very good job of that in New York City. I don't know that it always resonates with everybody, but I think that is something that I was curious your take on, because it's a thing that tends to be lacking in many of the classes that I have run and a lot of the ones that I've seen.
So I'm going to pivot back to something else you said in the middle of that about games. I think one thing is just people understanding like the full role of the coach. And for so many people, and possibly because of classes that they went to, not even parkour classes, but when they were younger, it's very easy to have a very narrow view of the coach as, well, the coach is there to teach me this thing, and not actually what are all of the other responsibilities of the coach around that. And some of those are going to be like just creating the right social environment for the space. Some of them are going to be how they're interacting with the public. If you're teaching outdoor classes, then you're also actually kind of guiding people in the public space, and you've got a whole role about how you interact with the broader environment, not just the obstacles. But so many people just get fixated on, okay, what am I trying to teach people? How am I going to do that? And that's what the role of the coach is. So just having a much more expanded view of what are the roles and responsibilities I have as a person in charge of the space, I think is already going to lead to better social environments for people, because it's just something that you're considering a bit more deeply than you might otherwise. But I'm really excited to come back to when you were talking about games. I can delay it for a few minutes if you want to talk more about this.
No, let's go for it. Let's go for it.
Okay, so I, like you, have probably had some disappointing experiences with games in the past, and I can have a knee-jerk reaction about, yeah, but can we do something useful now? And I think that vastly diminishes the values that games and play have, and from both a what I have now experienced and also just from a learning uh, education point of view, it's very clear that people learn powerfully through play and potentially games as part of that. What or where I think people go wrong is they think that doing a game about a thing is enough to develop that skill. And so probably a lot of mine, maybe some of your negative experiences have been that you've been doing a game around something, but not in a way that's going to make you get any better at it. And so it just feels like a waste of time. And so what I've realized is that the specifics of the game really matter. So one of it, not just, oh, this is a game where we use flow, but okay, this is a game where the only reason we're doing this is because we're trying to develop people's flow, for instance. And if that's the case, well, okay, well, now I need to make sure that the rules of the game create a challenging enough environment that people are actually going to be forced to be working in a growth zone during the game, and that the objective of the game doesn't, what's the word? Doesn't incentivize other behavior. So many times people will go to, well, what have you told me the goal of the game is? Like, how do I win the game? And I'm just going to behave in a way that helps me win the game. But in the learning context, the game isn't about winning or losing or anything else. It's just about acting in a way that's going to help you develop the skill. So I think if people were a bit more clever about how they use the rules to kind of incentivize developmental ways of acting rather than just winning ways of acting, games will be just way better in general. And the other thing is thinking about the roles that you have in a game. So I've got like an example, and Hedge characterized this for me really well, actually. Sebastian Foucon was doing some games at a workshop in Berlin a few years ago for the Parkour One's 10th anniversary things, and he essentially had a parkour, I guess you guys call it red light, but like the Squid Game turn around, people move when you're not looking. And Sebastian did it really well, because the role of the person doing the red light isn't to beat everyone, it's to just give them a challenging enough environment to act in behind them. So it worked really well with Seb at the front, and then I guess like a 10-year-old kid won, and so they became the red light person. But they viewed their role as the game as to stop anyone touching them. So as soon as people got close, you just created this atmosphere where no movement is happening because they're turning around every 1 second and sending people back. And so I think that was the other thing that really kind of crystallized in my head. It's like, do the people playing the game understand the role that they have in this game? And you see this in other things, like martial arts is a great example where you can have a blue belt and a white belt together, but it only works if the blue belt understands their job is to kind of get in awkward positions and then gently get out of them, and not to just smash the floor with the white belt.
Yeah. And the blue belt's job is to make sure that the white belt does not break their arm, because the white belt has no knowledge of how strong they are in certain very compromised positions, or get kneed in the face. Yeah,
it's not only a problem in games. I think anytime you have a mixed ability group that are working with, whether it's partner or group activities, is everyone kind of aware what their role is in that environment? But I think from the coaching perspective, the hard thing is not just are they aware, but do their different roles also feel worthwhile to each person? Because it's all very well having it's my job just to help G people along, but they should feel that whether it's through their kind of like leadership skills or whether they've got a little side quest that allows them to also be challenged, it's like, is this a game that works for everyone in the class? And I think that's the other pitfall that they fall into, which is this is great for half the class, and half the class are either way out of their depth or so bored out of their minds that they're just kind of switching off. So yeah, games super good, but I think way more difficult to use well than people often think they are.
Yeah, that's a great point. When you were talking about flow, I was trying to just think of games other than add-on that I use. I've never done this with a group, but this is something that I would encourage people to maybe try in their own training. And I think if you had the right group, I think it's something like IG with an advanced group, this could be really fun, is using music or tempo to dictate flow, or doing something that I will do is essentially like a flashcard game with steps. So if you're at a pretty boring spot and you've got 3 obstacles and you're like, I want to work on flow today, you could just roll dice or pick a number at random, and it's going to tell you the number of steps that you have in between each obstacle, and all of a sudden you have to change your skill set. There's a lot of games that
Yeah,
I would do with myself in my own training that I think, to your point of having a mixed group, if all of a sudden somebody's taking 4 steps between obstacles and they're really meant for 1 or 2 steps, it's going to be really easy for a newer person to not understand that maybe you use those 4 steps to go around to the back side of the obstacle in an interesting way, or use a cartwheel as 2 of your steps, or kind of embrace the difficulty of that constraint and make it part of the challenge. And that is where I think the coach's job as a facilitator becomes so important. And this is something that I struggle with, being somebody who has a podcast. I'm a wordy person. I think through language. I'm one of those people that my brain to generate images is literally, it feels like an Etch-a-Sketch. Like, I cannot think in pictures. I have to like draw a picture in my head if I want to try and visualize something. I'm using quotes there because it really struggles. And I think in words. So when I'm coaching for a long time, and still sometimes I struggle to find the right balance between showing and telling. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on where you've seen that balance being, or what you think of as maybe not the ideal balance, but how you try to give space for describing something, setting the stage for people in a game, like you said, giving people the enough information to work with, but not overwhelming them with information, leaving them with time to move.
yeah. So at some point, I want to develop just a small book or 2-page of aphorisms of what is the most crystallized way of putting these concepts across, both like in general, but especially when I'm delivering courses. And one of the things that I've really kind of settled on as just being such a good idea is, what is the least amount of information people need to safely start? And I'm sure I'm not the only person that's come up with this as like a key point. But I think that applies to all things in a class setting, but arguably all kind of physical instruction. And I think games are no different. So if you've got something that's going to be a bit more complicated, I think, what is the simplest version of this game that only requires 2 bits of information? Let's do a round of that. And then, okay, now we're going to add in another couple of rules. And that way people only ever have to think about 1 or 2 things at a time. And I think you can develop some really complex ideas through that, but you're just giving it to them in a way that is more manageable and is just the way that people are able to focus on the words.
Yeah, that's a good way. Just start with what people need to know, and you don't need to forecast every question and answer it before it happens, because a lot of times asking the questions will help everybody understand a little bit better. I think that's a really nice little spot to start. I'm curious if you have any stories of classes, because I think we've been talking a lot about how to get things to go right. Do you have any stories that you can think of things that you look back at that you wish you could change? That you wish you'd had a Chris Keighley Grand Poobah coach telling you maybe that's not the best idea for running this class.
Are they Charlie Fox shots that I've delivered? Let's cast my mind back.
Yes. I'm assuming they're not recent. So let's think back to the early days.
I mean, I'm optimistic. I've not had any real messes in the last few years. I think next year I'm coming up on 20 years of coaching. So
Wow.
fingers crossed some things have been delivered better more recently. I think if I look at things that I wish I could have done differently is sometimes, like I started as a relatively strict coach, especially with kids, just in the sense of, I guess those were the teachers that I had at school. So that was the kind of model I fell into. And then over time, I've gradually become a little bit better about not other things a challenge and like, can I redirect people rather than have to attack the problem head on? And in general, I think that's been a very good instinct to lean into. But I can just think of one or two like small spills that were people kind of not doing the things that they were told to do. And in one case, even they did it after class, not during the class, but maybe I could have been just a little bit more wary that people were going to decide to do something completely out of the box. And in the couple of cases that I can think of, that they have been explicitly told they are not allowed to do because I am trying to stop this happening. But actually, maybe I needed to be a little bit more firm in a couple of moments. So again, nothing super recently, but I think trying to find that right blend of being authoritative, knowing when actually you do just need to be like, actually, we need to stop. So finding that balance took me a long time, and probably I've slightly overshot in various moments. Hopefully I found a balance that works for me now.
Yeah. That's way better than mine. I remember one of my first, when I first started falling in love with polecats, I was coaching at Brooklyn Zoo. I was probably 19 and it just opened. And I just thought polecats were so great and they're fantastic for foot placement. And you get a little bit of upper body and a little bit of lower body and the coordination aspect. And I took an entire beginner class, many first timers who probably could not cat hang on a wall with their current level of fitness. And we spent maybe 40 of the 60 minutes just doing like stepping into a polecat or just being in the polecat position. And I'm cheering them on. You can do it. We're going to work up to jumping into this pole. Isn't that just the coolest thing? And it's just in hindsight, I'm just imagining the faces of these 50-year-old women who stumbled in from a Pilates class or something and saw, oh, parkour, this seems so interesting. I can learn to move a little bit more engagingly with my environment. I'll learn to fall better. And going back, way back to your point of meeting people where they're at, that was here's my highly specific, many prerequisites required to enjoy this movement in any capacity. And now this is going to be the meat and potatoes of your first parkour experience. Unsurprisingly, I don't think any of them ever returned. So I apologize to any of those people.
But it's always such a difficult balance depending on how your classes are arranged, right? So I know a lot of places where you sign up for 15 weeks and you can do that term after term and year after year. But for those 15 weeks, there's quite a clear curriculum and you have the same people every week. And I think that's a great environment where this would probably feature somewhere in the last 5 weeks where you've had a chance to lay down some of the prereqs and people are a little bit more invested and they've done some of the other quote unquote fun stuff first. But then you've got environments where we essentially just have a years and years long people drop in whenever. And it's like, how do you find the balance between giving the people what that have got to that point, they're ready for this, and then you do have someone that turns up for the first time that day, and it's a more difficult balancing act to try and that's why I think
100%.
having the scalability works really well.
Every single one of my coaching experiences. Yeah.
Yes, and same for us. Yeah. I think just the way the culture around sports in London is for these more open-ended ideas. I think it's very common that people kind of drop in and drop out. I think when you've got something like a soccer team for your American audience, and so everyone's working towards playing matches every week, then I think you get the same people at every training session. But something more open-ended like parkour, it seems to have a little bit more of a wave, and especially with adults, kids a little bit less so.
Yeah, thank you for meeting us where we're at. Excellent demonstration of that coaching tip. I would love to see more parkour boot camps. That is
Mm.
a phrase I think people in America are used to with weight loss or yoga or whatever it is, where you sign up for 6 weeks and you know that you're going to be going once or twice a week for that period of time and it's structured. Because to your point, parkour already is hard enough. The skill curve is going to be varied in wildly different ways for people with different athletic backgrounds. And that is hard enough to manage as it is, let alone when you have someone who is in a beginner class, but they have been coming for 10 weeks consistently and they're relatively athletic. And then you have 5 of the 7 people are drop-ins for the first time that are wearing squishy running shoes that look like they have worked an office job for the last 30 years of their life and not done much else. And I had a lot of those. And you learn as a coach how to scale and try and you also learn that you can kind of set up the athletes who are maybe more experienced. You can articulate to them, to your point of the sort of role playing that can be inherent in games and clarifying what somebody's role is. It is an opportunity as a coach in those scenarios to say, great, I'm going to take Brandon as the example in this class. Maybe don't say it to them, but you set them up as this is the person the aspirational figure in the class. This person's been here for 10 weeks. You don't need to try and catch up to what they're doing. This is just to show you, what a little bit of parkour training can do. And then they get to be the leader in the class. That's fulfilling for them. The people who are coming in understand that there is going to be a skill gap from the beginning. They're not feeling insufficient because they're not able to catch up to this person on their first day. And it is a good chance to learn those skills and learn the sort of soft skills of how to manage people and create those social spaces that are hierarchical is not the right word. I don't think. Like maybe they're hierarchical, but in a not in a power structure sense. And that's also maybe something that I've embraced more as a coach is many people lean into a hierarchical structure. Even in parkour, I think if you go to a jam, you will often see a hierarchy start to form by the middle or end of the jam, where there's the people at the top who are sharing the information, whether they're coaches or in a formal setting or in an informal setting. And you have the beginners and they're all getting together. And if you can establish a hierarchy and from the beginning establish that it is not that the hierarchy is not inherently tied to a power dynamic, but it's there for
Mm.
mutual support. I have found that to be something I definitely don't succeed at every time, but it's been one of the best tools for me for dealing with those incredibly diverse classes and just leaning into the fact that like that's how a lot of people are. And especially here in America, I think maybe more than in some other places, we tend to like to know where we fit into a hierarchy and embracing that, but differentiating it from you suck because you're at the
Yeah, I
bottom.
think
It's just you're at the bottom because you're new.
I think I would love to come up with a better word than hierarchy, but I think it kind of makes sense in this context. I think what you're kind of talking about is just disconnecting the hierarchy based on whatever metrics you're using for it from a hierarchy of respect, and it's just so common that whether it's respect or authority, it just kind of aligns with let's say in this case a skill or an experience hierarchy. So it's like, can I keep this flat whilst people recognizing that, if I want to
There's a
find
lot of YMCA hands
information
going
or
on for the
inspiration from
listeners. You need to go
somewhere.
over to the audio to see these graphs. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry, I interrupted
there's a
you
lot
to
of random
share that.
hand signals being thrown up. I have a flat arm and an arm that couldn't decide which gradient it wanted to go on. But yeah, the idea of like, I want to keep a flat, non-hierarchical respect structure whilst giving people the opportunities to know, like, okay, who can I be inspired by? Who can I look up to? And also conversely, who is it a good idea for me to try and emulate at this stage of my journey? And who is a more aspirational reach for trying to emulate?
Yeah. What are because you, again, and I'm just tapping into your adapt brain, since you have done 1 through 3 at this point. Is there 4? Are you are you level 4? A one-on-one fight, a duel to the death is how you get adapt level 4 with Chris Keighley?
Hang on, I got exactly half of your question because I'm blaming my Boston connection.
Oh, you're good. You're good. So I was saying I wanted to ask if, from a coach's perspective, let's say it's a new coach, level 1, they're coming in. What do you see new coaches do the most regularly, the sort of most common mistake that new coaches make? And what do you see the most common mistake that experienced coaches make? So maybe they're coming in for their level 3, and that's where I was asking if there is a level 4, because I don't know.
Right.
But
No.
yeah, if they're incredibly experienced and incredibly novice.
Yeah. So I think most novice coaches, their mistakes kind of fall into 2 broad camps. One is, and I think when you talk to Adam, you're speaking about what is it like to be a professional coach, and it's just the general bare bones of like basic professional coaching. Can I command a space? Can I talk confidently to people? Can I say something succinctly? So I think on one end they've got the basic things that they need to work on, and from a more kind of parkour specific perspective, I don't think they've really got the experience to know how do I create an exercise that improves something versus just an exercise that uses that thing. And I think you put up a really interesting post, I think on Instagram recently, about the use of drills in class, and actually as a coaching community, parkour coaches don't often use drills particularly well because it's a drill that features a skill or a technique. It's not a drill that's designed to actually develop that skill or technique in any meaningful way. So I think at the kind of more novice coach level, that those are probably the 2 most common buckets of mistakes. And I'm going to just talk about like novice versus experienced, because although we do have a level 1, 2, 3 in adapt, people can come to those at very different points on their coaching journeys. And I've had some people that will do their level 2 after 3 or 4 years of coaching, but maybe in a more limited context. And I've had some people that have come to their level 1 with 10 years of coaching and coaching in a variety of different contexts behind them, and they're just much more experienced coaches. So I think it makes way more sense to talk about where people are on their coaching journey rather than necessarily being certain levels just because of when they come to a course. In terms of mistakes more experienced coaches make, I don't know that there's such an obvious like, oh, I see this one feature a lot. To some extent, I would say they still suffer from the one that we talked about with beginners, which is, have they really considered how to develop this skill or technique or whatever it may be in a way that is really relevant and actually going to help people, so that they do a better job. But I do think it's kind of a lifelong struggle for people to really think about how can I help people actively improve. So I think that's one thing. And I would say that maybe the other thing is it's very rare for people to have the opportunity to coach people that have been training for a long time, and whether that's adults or whether it's teens that have been doing it for 6, 7, 8 years. And I think I see a lot of people that once your students and your athletes get to a certain stage, they kind of pivot to the, oh, here's the basic prompt and you can just auto select for yourself, and they rely on their athletes to do the hard work for them. And I'm not saying it's necessarily good or bad, but I think one of the reasons why, okay, go away and choose 5 of these things works really well at a more novice level is because you're trying to develop those skills and that parkour vision in your students. So if you never give them the chance to find it for themselves, they are going to be more dependent on you. Once students have got that ability, they are going to be employing it in their own training all the time. So I think using the class environment to get your experienced and advanced students to do that more is just a waste of their time. And it's like, how can I create an environment that you're less likely to encounter for yourself? So I think that would be probably be the most common like general error that more experienced coaches make, is just thinking that their students get to a certain level where they almost kind of like phase out, or it's like you graduate from being just a student to, oh, well, now you're a coach as well. And that's the kind of pipeline, rather than how can you come to class for 15 years and still get something out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, your point about drills, I think a lot of times
It was your point.
Well, well, you're agreeing with my point about drills. It's very validating. Thank you. I think that a lot of times using language from traditional like team sports or S&C can be difficult in parkour, because so much of parkour is about the mental adaptation that's happening. If to go back to the polecat example, I can show somebody the position, and the drill often is just do it from farther and farther away. But for an elite, or I don't want to say elite, that's a weirdly potentially condescending word, but for an athlete who has more experience, I think you can look at what is the actual stimulus, and you're spot on that the adaptation that you're chasing when you tell somebody go and do this thing is to open up their parkour vision. If it's your workshop in MoveNYC were these sort of toe hooks and hang type movements that I have never done before, if you had introduced those techniques to me in a structured context and then said go and find 5 of these, that would, I think, serve what our goal is here of you introduced a new technique, you're chasing now this adaptation, or your goal for this exercise is to get people to incorporate it into their parkour vision in a self-guided way, so that when they leave the session, they have practice developing that skill of seeing toe hooks while you're there to provide, oh, you only found 3, what about this one, what about this one? That is because you've
Yeah,
already provided the structure for that movement. It's not this generalized go find stuff. And I see that all the time in people who want to, for instance, get Kongs better. And something that's incredibly underrated that I always tell people to do is go to a gymnastics gym or go to your parkour gym, or find something that is relatively soft. A fallen tree is a great example, something that you could find kind of out in a lot of training spots. Sprint, run 3 or 4 sprints at 80-85% next to it, and then accelerate. And you're only practicing carrying the speed that you just got from your nervous system, sprinting as fast as you could into a Kong, because all we're working here in this drill is the adaptation of getting your brain used to running fast into the takeoff of the Kong. We're not worrying about a technical landing. We're not adding a precision. We're not worrying about anything else. And it's interesting to me that a lot of times parkour athletes who maybe do get more experienced, I think because so much of parkour is mental, we think that if there's not a mental component or a direct practice of the skill inside the drill is not relevant, when often it's, in my experience of personally with training and training with athletes at a higher level, it's actually the opposite. It's like you get enough practice doing Kong Prees. If you're still struggling to get more power, you're probably not going to get better doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. Let's identify where you're struggling. Maybe it's because you're slowing down a ton on the last 3 steps because you don't know how to handle more than 60% of your actual maximum running speed. Maybe it's because your brain is not used to the visual processing that's required to put your hands on something with precision at that speed. Laches are a great example, right? I tell people all the time, just do cast laches into a foam pit or for distance on grass. Don't try and always make your biggest thing, if you're adding scale or adding complexity, you only want to control for one of those variables at any given time. And that's where drills are fantastic. And I think sometimes when you're newer, you embrace that. You understand the concept of breaking something down, and you're used to, oh, I'm going to work on Kong ups because I need to just work on pushing off of the obstacle and getting my feet up to it before I work on pushing off the obstacle and bringing my feet over it. And then we kind of forget that and get trapped into this narrative as athletes that if it's not the skill training, it's not worth it. And I agree with you. I've learned a ton from taking workshops with more advanced athletes and coaches. Sometimes they're not even more advanced athletes, but they're coaches who just have a really unique and valuable way of looking at something and breaking something down. And I wanted to highlight that because you brought it up, and because in my Instagram post, I think people didn't understand exactly the nuance of what I was saying. And I'll probably be sharing more drills. I mean, a great example of an actual drill is just practicing your bounce backs. The skill of bouncing something confidently is a drill. And yeah, you can practice bounce backs in training, and you will, but there's a difference between having a like, holy shit, I'm gonna die, and doing it on adrenaline versus spending 15 or 20 or 25 attempts building up that safe movement pattern to handle the oh shit, I'm gonna die moment.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's also a little bit of like the difference between development and application. And you will always get some
Mm-hmm.
application tangentially through your training. But if you really want to develop it, you want to create an environment that allows you to do that. So I think that's one key thing. And before then, what you're really kind of talking about is just like the specificity of a drill, like and the specificity of the goal of the exercise. Because before you're doing a drill, you need to know, well, what am I actually trying to develop? And then it might be a drill, it might be a route, it might be practicing the whole movement, as you say. But so many people, going back to your question about the mistakes people make, is not having specific enough goals or intentions for the exercises that they're working on. So it's just like, oh, we're going to improve comms. But as you say, are we looking at distance? Are we looking about application in weird environments, which is definitely my thing? Are we looking at just speed into it? Are we looking at connecting comms with other movements? And once you've got a more specific intention, then you can make a choice about, okay, we're going to use a drill, we're going to have a route that implements this or whatever it may be. But without going into this more nitty kind of gritty, what exactly am I trying to develop here? Like you've just got 1,000 different things that use comms and you've got no idea which to pick because you don't really know what you're trying to work with people.
Yeah. Specificity
And
to the adaptation is key.
yeah, as literally what happens in almost every other sport. And I think you don't. The mistake is thinking that all coaching should be like that. And I think having some more experiential elements can be really important in classes. And this probably now goes to like a way wider point. But for me, a good parkour coach is both a good coach and a good role model. For me, that's fundamental to the practice of parkour, which is not definitely not you need to be an elite athlete. But I think you should have some real lived experience of the practice that you can draw on and share with people. And you should role model the behaviors associated with that. So that's it's not how big your Kong is, but it's, are you trying your best? Are you willing to do something that's a little bit scary? And again, that doesn't mean you've got to climb up on something stupidly high. It's just, do I engage with these things? Like I'm telling you they're important, but I'm also showing you that they're important.
Yeah. Walking the walk as a coach is, and knowing that that doesn't mean, and this gets back to your initial point of where your perspective is coming from, which is rooted in this more values driven side of the practice as opposed to the performance driven side of the practice. Knowing that walking the walk for many of your students, I would say the vast majority, is about the soft skills, is about demonstrating that you are receptive to criticism, that you are open to solving problems in the moment, that you can collaborate, that you want to overcome challenge, and that you have some physical capacity. That helps. But your students generally are not going to know the difference between a 2-foot cap pass pre, now I'm adopting your parlance, and a 10-foot level Kong pre. They won't be able to really tell that how sick Thomas from MPO is because they just can't appreciate it. But they will be able to tell if you're a dick or not. To go back into my own common parlance. So I think that's a really well taken point, is to know that you need to walk the walk as a coach and understand what people expect and understand that how you present and what you present is important. Hey, do you have anything else that you wanted to touch on? I feel like we've been doing a really fun coaching deep dive. I'm at a good spot. I think we've covered a lot of bases, but I'm curious if you have anything that is a pet peeve for you, or that you're really passionate about that you wanted to touch on,
So many things.
other than QM.
Yeah. Well, you talked to Adam about QM, so like I will get on my little soapbox about that in a second. There's a couple of other things that you kind of like brought up just like during the course of the conversation already, and when you talked about with the toe swings, and just because you're an experienced athlete, that doesn't mean that was a specific thing that you had a lot of experience in. And I think that's another common mistake that a lot of people make, which is you just kind of have people of like, oh, beginner, intermediate, advanced. And because parkour is so variable, someone can be training for a very long time and either not really come across a certain thing or not really value it and put a lot of effort into it. So everyone's individual performance scatter graph is going to be dots all over the place. And so the question is always, are they experienced or advanced in the specific thing we're doing now, not just in general in parkour? Because almost like that doesn't really exist as a concept. And much earlier on, it was very funny talking about, like a relatively boring spot with only 3 obstacles. And I was just thinking, you and I are both probably quite spot privileged in our lives, and we've grown up a lot of places where that would be quite a boring spot. I suspect there's a few people out there where somewhere where it's got 3 obstacles they can interact with might maybe the best their village has to offer. So as just an amusing observation on the journey.
True. Call out my spot privilege.
It's a real thing.
It is, especially for those in the UK. I gotta say, I'm thinking 3 obstacles. If you're in the US, go to your local park or playground. You could probably find 3 picnic tables. That'll set you right. That was my training environment for probably the first 2 years of parkour, and I love me a picnic table. I'll love me a picnic table for sure. I also love QM. I always like to give you grief about it, only because we regularly bring it up and it's just become an inside joke at this point. But I think this is a great thing because I just made a sarcastic Instagram post yesterday where I brought it up that you look like you'd use QM for strength training derogatory. And all these people are like, oh my God, don't tell PK Gen, don't tell. And it's so funny because I think that it's become a kind of a meme, but it's one of the things that I actually use in almost every class as either a warm-up tool or as a end challenge tool. I think that's something that I picked up from PK Gen when we were talking about very early on the keeping it open-ended where pass fail is based on effort. And I think that exercises like hanging for time, like QM, things that people know that when they finish, they can't do it anymore, are phenomenal for that community building and culture of effort vibe. And I do think that there's a phenomenal place in that. And it's funny when you're talking about how you don't always end in the circle that someone like Jesse does. I actually think that events like Rendezvous and when I've gotten to see you coach, ending with a communal challenge is doing the same thing, but in an embodied way. And I love the fact that most of those big events end in that way. That's, from the art of gathering perspective, again, a great way to crystallize what is the message that we want people to take away here. It's that you can push yourself harder than you thought you could. You can overcome a challenge that maybe you didn't think was possible for yourself. And you can do it with people of all skill levels who maybe are better than you. Maybe they go a little farther than you. Maybe they went up the stairs 1 or 2 more times than you did, but you contributed as much as you could. And that's what we're celebrating here.
Yeah.
So I do think that
and it's something
I've seen you do a great job with that.
Well, it's something that when we first started, when I first started going to the outdoor classes, because this was a little bit before I started coaching, where we'd have a big warm-up together, which was always, and we knew full well, it was like, it's not a 30-minute warm-up, it's a 10-minute warm-up and then 20 minutes of like big group conditioning together whilst we've got everyone as one group. And then we'd have a bunch of skill work during the class. and then we'd come back together at the end, and it would always be like 10 minutes of core conditioning before we did a cool down. And it's, as you say, it's just a really nice way to get people back together, doing something hard together. I think create such good bonds as a group, and it's just a different way of doing that, and one that I've always, I think, both valued and identified with. I think even before I got into parkour, I remember a couple of the guys on my soccer team that were a little bit stronger and had done some kind of like physical development training. So I started doing push-ups, and then I got a pull-up bar, and I got some weight. So kind of parkour as a, what does it mean to be strong, and can you make yourself stronger, like always strongly resonated with me. So I do have a lot of love for that as part of the practice. I also think arguably it is the kind of physical challenge to some extent is one of the things that unites a lot of the old school training and a lot of the people that are more focused on skill development now. Like the way it manifests may be very different, but ultimately just what is the hardest physical challenge I can find, and can I do it, or can I build up to it? And not purely a physical challenge. I think in both more conditioning elements and difficult technical movement, it's aligned with a mental challenge, and I think the combination of the two is fundamental to the practice. But I think that's the arguably maybe the most shared value between a very old school approach and what a lot of people are doing now, which is just what is the hardest physical mental challenge I can do, and what do I need to do to get me there. And for some people that will be some crazy QM stuff, and for some people that's going to be whatever crazy side flip pre, inward side to rail pre, whatever the hell people are doing nowadays. Slightly beyond me.
Inward side to rail pre, I've yet to see, but damn, that would be sick. Though I've seen
it's only a matter of time.
So it's only a matter of time. Yeah, and that goes back to what you were saying as well about knowing what the specificity of the adaptation is that you want, and what the specificity of the challenge is doing for you. And that is where I in my post, people are like, why do QM? What do you mean? And this is a great thing to talk about, because it is, like we said, if the challenge is, can I physically complete this? Can I put everybody in a group where it is, you don't have to pay to play, everybody can do it without any skill requirement, and they just try as hard as they can. We're chasing can somebody try really hard, get themselves really tired, feel accomplished about the level of physical and mental effort that they put. If you're trying to get a bigger stride pre or Kong pre or something, there are much more efficient ways to develop strength, but that's not the adaptation that we're chasing in that context. And that's where the context relevance and the specificity is so important, and why I enjoy poking fun to start the conversation, because I think there are a lot of people that haven't gotten to train with PK Gen, or haven't gotten to train on the flip side with the sort of more performance oriented, and understanding the role of all of that in creating either training stimulus or culture, or just exploring, like you said, that internal environment, and understanding that there are two modalities to tap into that same exploration of internal environment is super important.
Yeah, well, and critically, and I think this is maybe, whether it's for people that haven't experienced it, or whether it's people that just like got a snapshot of it, like these are not mutually exclusive things. Like if I'm sitting here telling you that a good coach should not just like role model, but provide a range of experiences for the students, like I absolutely fundamentally believe that includes being able to operate at both ends of this sphere. And as you say, if you're doing QM to get a bigger stride, I think you've fundamentally misunderstood physiology and anatomy, quite apart from anything else. But I think you've also misunderstood why that kind of exercise was being done in the beginning anyway. I think there's an element of the YAMC who are trying to build just like very broad physical capacities, and and they did a lot of different things. But if you ask them, is it doing the 500 drop jumps or the mile of QM, which one's going to give you a bigger jump? They're not unsophisticated guys. I'm pretty sure they could have told you which was which, and And also because they weren't doing it in a, let's say, in a more formal coaching setting where you're trying to really vary it from student to student, one of the reasons we don't get people stronger legs by doing 500 drop jumps is because you'll probably break quite a few people along the way, or at least there's the potential to break people along the way that haven't built up to that point. But those kind of extreme physical trainings, can produce results. If you look at a lot of the training that circus acts will do, it probably doesn't so neatly align with what the best sports science says you should do for strength development. But circus acrobats are among the very best well-rounded, or maybe not well-rounded, but very highest level athletes in the varying things that they do. And it's because they put loads and loads of time into it, and because it kind of, the best will rise to the top. So it's not necessarily a very inclusive training method in some ways, but that doesn't mean it's not effective. And I think people that have argued against doing these things as not working, it's possible to get too sports sciencey. I think we absolutely should use those lessons. And as coaches, if you're only seeing people for 2 hours a week, knowing how to get the best out of 15 minutes is a really useful skill and knowledge that you should have. But I think it's definitely too easy to fall into that, this doesn't completely align with what I've learned about energy systems, and therefore it's a completely rubbish kind of training, is its own kind of logical fallacy.
Yeah. It's knowing and accepting that I think parkour, as I don't want to say as it was intended to be practiced, because I think that puts a lot of weight on something that kind of developed organically, but it's understanding that parkour in its broadest strokes has so many aspects, and that your performance and skill output does not need to be the key decider of every training decision that you make, nor should it be. And I think for the people where that is the case, they are often the ones that end up saying see ya when they're 23 and things start getting difficult. And that adding in diversity of movement and adding in those challenges, like you said, when the Yamak did it, they were just trying to see how hard they could be as human beings. And that was their goal. And I think having that aspect of training once in a while is phenomenal. And anybody who is curious should go out and just try a 400 meter QM, because it's pretty fun. I mean, fun is the wrong word. It's type 2 fun.
Yeah, I almost just like using the word fun well, sorry, that's not true. I just like using the word fun to describe an activity, in and of itself, because different people will going to find different things fun. I think you can absolutely say, I found this fun, totally reasonable,
Yeah.
but treating any activity as being fun or boring kind of ignores the differentiation between people and what they're going to enjoy. What they're going to enjoy the most and get the most out of.
I like that nuance. That's very parkour as well. I want to ask you one last question, which is something I ask everybody. If you had a piece of media to recommend to the audience, whether that is a book, a film, a podcast, what would it be? And it doesn't need to be parkour related. It could be about anything.
Okay. I'm going to give you a very quick answer, which I'm sure has been recommended before, and many people will be familiar with. Out of Time is the best parkour video that there ever has been and ever will be, and I'm willing to die on this hill. I think it's from 2009. A lot of the movement in it still stacks up today. The vibe of the video is unparalleled. I think because there weren't so many videos back then, the influence that it had and just the kind of the step up in oh my God, what is possible, probably will never be able to be replicated, just because there's so much media, and the longer something goes on, the more incremental the gains are. So it's an unfair advantage, but for all of those reasons, I think it is absolutely my favorite parkour video, and the one that I'll keep coming back to.
That's phenomenal. I also think that would be a pick that not a lot of people who maybe know you would expect you to call, but I 100% agree. I never thought about framing it as the best that we'll ever be, but realistically, you're right that the impact that it had on the community because how early it was so disproportionate. And yeah, it was a binary moment. It was this like binary inflection point in the community for me as well of, oh, the sport's never going to look the same after this video came out. And yeah,
Yeah,
uh,
and
second that
I'm going to be
recommendation.
cheeky. I'm going to be cheeky and do one more because I suspect other people have said Out of Time, and I'd be amazed if no one else has
Actually,
suggested it.
I don't think anybody has because people usually go book.
Oh, what?
So
Oh, okay.
people have tended to go book. But I think you're the first one that we've talked about Out of Time before for sure. I think you're the first official recommendation.
Okay. Well, then I'll have a very cheeky second. Friday Night Madness 3 by Team Ryoku, which I'm pretty sure you will have seen, but I think
Is
very,
that the
very
gym
few
video
people have
where
watched. And
everybody's
it's,
doing 9-step wall flips in Toronto or
there's,
wherever it was in Canada?
yeah, it's all kinds of shenanigans going on in that video, which again, maybe people wouldn't guess would be one of my favorite videos because it's entirely gym training. And I would think would say they didn't do parkour. They're a stunt team, and it's a lot of flips and some martial arts and some breakdancing and just amazing gym vibes. Like I think that was one of the first
Yeah.
videos I saw back when we're downloading things before YouTube existed, maybe. And yeah, unparalleled vibes. Amazing song from Guano Apes. Cannot recommend it highly enough.
Yeah.
But still not as good as Out of Time.
That's a class one. It doesn't hold up the way Out of Time does for sure, but
No,
still very. I remember the influence of those videos. Have you seen Globus, the movie, the Jim and Joe?
no.
It's on the Jammer page. Oh,
I will check it
okay.
out.
Talk about gym vibes. Globus, the movie. That'll be my recommendation for this episode, even though I don't generally do one.
Okay.
It's just Jim and Joe doing full cast
Jim
lachey
and Joe things.
prees, probably 14 to Jim and Joe Hooger doing like 15 to 16-foot cast lachey prees to the metal framing of like windows in what looks like a studio gym that is maybe 10 or 11-foot ceilings, and just it's wild. It's the kind of chaotic training session that simultaneously looks so incredibly fun to have been at and very, very intimidating to have been at the same time. It's like 2 minutes long though, so anybody who's listening, Globus the movie, and it is on Jammer. I'll put it in the show notes along with Chris's 2 recommendations because it's a fun watch.
Sick. I'll be checking that out.
Uh, Awesome, dude. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Anybody who's made it this far, I'm sure has gotten a ton out of this. I love chatting with you. And every time we talk, I feel like I walk away more motivated and inspired to think about my coaching intentionally. So thank you for that. Thank
Oh,
you for everything you're doing, and have
you're welcome.
so much fun at ARDV. I'm excited to hang out in Denmark too soon.
So excited. Unbelievably excited to see you in Denmark. It's about time.
There you go, y'all. That was Chris Keighley. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you're not familiar with Chris, I would really encourage you to get out and take one of his workshops. I said really a lot there, but that's because that's how I feel. I got to do his workshop at MoveNYC, or at least parts of it, and help him test some stuff. And it was just such a blast. And again, somebody who I really respect as a coach, somebody that I think does a great job of keeping me honest when I am assessing what I want to deliver, and someone that I've really enjoyed sharing pieces of parkour with, getting feedback from, and looking to as a person to emulate in the space. So could not recommend Chris enough if you get the chance to work with him or have him out for an event. And if you just get the chance to chat with him, fantastic guy. And I'm looking forward to hanging with him at IG. If you're going to be at IG International Gathering in Denmark, let me know in the comments. I'm looking forward to seeing people there. I feel like I keep finding more and more folks who are going to be there. Going to be a great event, and I cannot wait. That's going to be in a little bit over a month. So if you're going to be there, I'll see you there. If not, I will catch you next week. Got a really, really fun episode planned, and I will not spoil too many details on it just in case there is a delay. It's going to be a little more production heavy. So for those of you who are listening audio, you may want to tune in to the video next week. And that is all I will say. Thank you as always for listening. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you later.